Welcome to At the Going Down of the Sun. For this episode, I've returned to my hometown of Beccles in Suffolk, England, to have a look at the life of a Royal Navy telegraphist called Alan Herbert George Fairhead. Alan was born in Beccles on the 20th of July 1925 to Herbert and Ivy Fairhead. Alan was employed by the General Post Office in Beccles as a sorting clerk and telegraphist, and possibly before then as a boy messenger. Boy messengers had to be between 13 and 17 years old, at least 4 foot 8 inches tall, and have a satisfactory health record. They had to pass an exam that covered English, handwriting, geography, arithmetic, spelling and history. A high standard of behaviour was also required, as they were under an obligation to never bring the King's uniform into disrepute. From the age of 18 they could apply to become an assistant postman or other roles such as telegraphists or work in the engineering department. These were the days when a telegram would be received and the boys were expected to dash to the house of the recipient immediately to deliver an urgent message. In smaller post offices, the job of sorting clerk was combined with that of a telegraphist, with other duties ranging from sorting the mail, manning the telegraph and telephone switchboard, selling stamps and postal orders and other counter services. At around the age of 16, a boy messenger could take further exams, and after a 2-year probationary period, Alan would have become an established sorting clerk and telegraphist in 1942. Alan was probably called up for service after his 18th birthday on the 20th of July 1943, and naturally he became a telegraphist in the Royal Navy. There were various schools around the country for telegraphists and radio operators. Whichever one Alan went to, the telegraphists were seen as a cut above the rest of the sailors, as they would be regularly talking to officers and were required to be able to send Morse code at least 20 words per minute, and were viewed as being highly intelligent and capable men. As a telegraphist general service, Alan would not be expected to carry out any other duties, but he could serve anywhere that he was required to. Some telegraphists were also trained as air gunners or submariners, who only did telegraphy when the sub surfaced. Some of them were shore wireless service, meaning that they would never go to sea. Alan did go to sea, and he soon found himself on board a landing craft tank Mark III, second series, exactly like this surviving example at the D-Day Museum at Portsmouth. This episode is being made for the 80th anniversary of D-Day in June 2024. Many of the TV stations have focused on the postponement of the landings by 24 hours due to a weather forecast that predicted a storm would pass right over the invasion fleet and risk the lives of those in the landing craft, leading to a disastrous start to Operation Overlord. I'll let General Eisenhower explain himself.
On the morning of June 4th, I came from my camp about a mile from here, came into this room. And Captain Stagg, who was the chief meteorologist for the Allied forces, he was supported by 2 or 3 Americans, a couple other Britishers. But he made the presentations. That morning, the stars were out, it looked beautiful, and he gave us the worst report you ever saw. And he talked about gales hitting the Normandy beaches, and winds up to the rate of 45 miles an hour, that kind of thing. Landing would be impossible. So I just said, all right, we have to postpone. So we postponed for 24 hours.
The weather report of the incoming storm had initially been sent by the Black Sod Lighthouse on the west coast of Ireland. It was known that the landing craft would be swamped if the sea were too rough. Getting back to Alan's story, as I mentioned, he was on a landing craft tank, number 7014, that was launched on the 12th of June 1944 from Glasgow by Sir William Arrol and Co., who were more famous for building bridges such as the Forth Bridge, Tower Bridge, and the Titan crane, the largest ever in 1907. And also the gantry over the dock at Harland and Wolff in Belfast for the building of the 3 Olympic liners, such as RMS Titanic. Mark III landing craft tank had a considerable range of 2,700 miles at 9 knots, possibly because some were built in Canada, so they would need to cross the Atlantic to take part in D-Day. When fully loaded, the LST Mark III could carry either 5 Churchill tanks, 11 Valentine tanks, or 11 Shermans. It was 192 feet long and had a box-like hull, a shallow draft for landing on the beaches, where it dropped its front ramp for the tanks to drive straight onto the shore after hopefully overcoming the various obstacles. The main deck was actually below the waterline while at sea. This meant that any ship towing them could only travel at 4 knots, otherwise the pumps would be overwhelmed when they tried to get rid of the water, and then only in winds up to force 4 on the Beaufort scale, classed as a moderate breeze or up to 18 miles per hour. On the 16th of October 1944, Allen's convoy was assembled in the Irish Sea, with ships joining from Glasgow, Belfast, Liverpool and Milford Haven, forming up to pass beyond Land's End en route to Gibraltar. As they went into the Mediterranean under their own power, they would stop at Egypt before moving on to the Far East, where the landing craft were to transport troops for the invasion of the Pacific Islands and Japan. The skippers had authority to slip the tow ropes in the event of an emergency, but otherwise they needed authority from the commander of the convoys escorting warships. The convoy consisted of 35 merchant vessels, with 5 of the ships towing 9 landing craft, escorted by 6 Royal Navy ships and 3 submarines. Allen would have joined them from Liverpool, with 7014 attached to the SS Nairnbank, along with 494. The convoy set off, and the following day, as the weather started to worsen, they encountered increasingly poor conditions until on the 18th the order to heave to was given. 30 minutes later, Nairnbank reported that it had lost contact with 494. HMS Allington Castle was sent to assist. Shortly after that, the convoy reported to the Admiralty that the weather was now at force 8. The wind was around 40 miles an hour with waves up to 25 feet high. The landing craft that had not managed to heave to were in a catastrophic situation. Several would have been filling with water much faster than their pumps could cope with, and they started to sink. At 4:30 on the afternoon of the 18th of October, 7014 radioed that they were in distress and wanted to abandon ship. Perhaps Allen would have sent that message. By morning, a full-scale rescue was underway with RAF Coastal Command Liberators and short Sunderland flying boats searching for survivors. The survivors from 7014 had been rescued, with Allen also being recovered, but 8 other sailors were listed as missing, probably killed. A total of 55 men died, but more than 100 were saved. Many had faced the dilemma of staying on board their landing craft, or risk jumping into the sea over 100 miles from Land's End. Allen had been rescued by an escort rescue ship called Dundee that sailed with 24 convoys after taking up its duties in August 1943. It rescued 11 survivors, most of whom are thought to have been on this voyage. A board of inquiry was convened in Gibraltar. Several recommendations were made. No other LCTs were towed in convoys, instead either going under their own power or being secured to the decks of freighters. The families received the news. In the case of James Regan, a 28-year-old able seaman on 7014, by a letter sent by the Commodore at Chatham, and in due course a note from His Majesty King George VI. Alan's family would have received similar ones. It has been speculated that Alan may have died on the journey back after being rescued, due to his body having been returned to his family rather than being buried at sea. His family refused a war grave headstone and instead had a more elaborate one made. He is also listed on the Beccles War Memorial. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.